The WWE had a flat out brutal end to the decade, and I think in today's day and age, we should really be thankful for what we have. We're out of the trenches after seeing some of the most inconsistent, discombobulated, and weird stretches in WWE programming. Sure, today's day and age isn't perfect, but at least there's a lot more consistency, and we have good, great, or even downright fantastic pay-per-views. I decided to put everything in perspective and take you guys back to the final years of the 2010s, and let's start in 2017. Let's begin at the Elimination Chamber. Here, Bray Wyatt won his first WWE Championship, and a month beforehand, Randy Orton won the Royal Rumble. Randy was a member of the Wyatt family. He broke out of the group, eventually set Bray's compound on fire. I'm pretty sure that's arson. And then we got the match. Now, keep in mind, the thing for Bray was, for the longest time, is he just needed that breakout. He just needed that title reign to skyrocket him to the top. At WrestleMania 33, he lost the WWE title, and during the match, WWE decided to project maggots and roaches and other various insects onto the mat while the action was going on. These two ran it back a few weeks later at Payback, but this time WWE wanted to do a cinematic match and something similar to the Hardys' Final Deletion. Here we got the House of Horrors match, which was not the greatest. These guys were brawling in Bray's House of Horrors, where Randy found himself in a room full of dolls hung from the ceiling. We're treated to movie-like background music, and this portion of the match ends with a fridge being dropped on Randy Orton. You're supposed to believe that this match is happening right now, with the rest of the match happening later in the night. Only thing is, this pay-per-view was in San Jose, and while this was happening, it was about 5:30 p.m. and somehow it's pitch black. This wasn't like the Boneyard match or even the Firefly Funhouse match where they tried to do crazy properly. It was just odd. It's actually the randomness what came after which is the craziest part of all of this. So Randy was the WWE champion, and in this match he was attacked by Jinder Mahal. And remember, this was perennial jobber Jinder Mahal, and somehow this man went from a perennial jobber to a main eventer. This wasn't like Drew McIntyre's Chosen One to Ultimate Glory story. No, this was literally a guy who was just a jobber a few months ago, went up to the top, and now he was facing Randy Orton for the WWE title. This was going to happen at Backlash. We got to the match. It wasn't anything crazy, nothing out of the ordinary. And then out of nowhere, Jinder Mahal wins the WWE Championship, and everyone was losing their minds at what was essentially randomness personified. Yo, I'm Indian myself. This was cool as hell seeing some representation, but this title reign was as bad as people make it out to be. The finishes were very similar, with the Singh brothers interference, a Kalash from Jinder, and that was your match. There was nothing inspiring or special that came out of this. We got the return of the Punjabi prison, and during it, Khali came back to run a very bad interference on the match, and then when Jinder retained, he thought he was the WWE champion. Heading into SummerSlam, Mahal took on Shinsuke Nakamura, a man who debuted earlier in the year and had a ton of hype behind him, someone who had a natural charisma and fans wanted to see on that next level. Also, take into account that headed into SummerSlam, Shinsuke Nakamura beat John Cena of all people. That drop does not look fun. Anyways, at SummerSlam, Jinder retained, and after this, he was cutting promos on Nakamura, and I'll just let the clips do the talking here.
Shinsuke, you always look the same.
He only dropped the title because Brock Lesnar did not want to work with him. The reason for this whole thing was WWE wanted to tap into the Indian market a little bit more. Didn't end up happening like they thought it would. SmackDown 2017 wasn't crazy. I don't think it was awful. It wasn't this dramatic downfall that some people make it out to be. Was it weird? Yeah. Nonsensical? Yeah. But there was some okay stuff in here. So that's the SmackDown side of things. The commissioner of that show was Shane McMahon, who I'll get to in the 2018 and 2019 portion of this video. But let's move over to Raw. And the person who was running Raw at this time was your Olympic hero and mine, Kurt Angle. Now, Kurt did some pretty odd stuff in his time. This man would literally do anything to make us laugh, but there was a deep, dark secret that Kurt was hiding from us. All these years later, we come to find out that Corey Graves has some information that's very confidential. So on the weekly, it's Kurt trying to suppress what this is, and it's really worrying him. This information is apparently something that Kurt says, and I quote, "This could ruin me." Weeks of this secret being teased, and Kurt eventually told us what was up. Turns out he's got a long lost son. Kurt, an Olympian, wrestling machine, parallels someone else, and it ends up being Jason Jordan. This leads to just weeks of awkwardness between these two. Hey dad, I can't believe you're my dad. Are you my actual dad? They've acknowledged it here and there, and it led to Jordan's push with Rollins in 2018 before his neck injury, and it was just strange. So, okay, he's getting scolded by his apparent dad, and the storyline is, again, continued randomness, but at least he didn't take him everywhere. You know who apparently took their dad everywhere? Bayley. It was time for This Is Your Life 2017 edition presented by Alexa Bliss. You guys know the deal, Bayley and Alexa in a rivalry for the Raw Women's title. Bayley had debuted just a few months beforehand, and for those of you who weren't watching at the time, Bayley's character was the hugger, a fangirl who was just happy to be there, someone with the bright lights, bright colors, wacky, inflatable arm flailing tube men, and a presentation that could easily be marketed to kids. But here they finished her off and made her look so goofy, because there was one thing that Bayley was scared of, and that was kendo sticks. Hang on just a second, I'll get to that. First off, Alexa Bliss presented the This Is Your Life segment, one of the most cricket, silent, and cringe-inducing segments in WWE history. And everyone was just like, Bayley's a very nice girl, she's bland, she's boring, she just doesn't do anything, that she was a child who brought her dad to school and to dates with guys, and Bayley's supposed ex dated her just so he could get close with her best friend, who he then proceeds to make out with, all the while the crowd is chanting boring and delete. What was the icing on the cake in this was Bayley came out to take out Alexa and didn't even get the upper hand, and the match was on Sunday. You're just waiting for the punchline, for the big moment, for the gotcha. Didn't happen. But on the following Sunday, it somehow got worse. Alexa Bliss versus Bayley in a kendo stick on a pole match at Extreme Rules. Whoever retrieved it could legally use the kendo stick, so they're trying to frame this as the innocent girl who will eventually go off. Bayley retrieves the kendo stick and doesn't even proceed to use it. She forgets how to use this kendo stick, and this match was just a miss. Bayley got walked over, and I don't know if point of no return is an exaggeration, I'd say it probably is, but this was pretty close to that. The match was bad and they just dropped the ball with it. Roman and Cena came to us on a random B pay-per-view after Cena just demolished Roman on the mic. This was a generational clash, a new school versus old school match that could have been on a big four. Goldberg beat Kevin Owens for the Universal title with KO and Chris Jericho settling for the US title at WrestleMania. If you need an idea for how discombobulated the WWE was, take 2017 into consideration. This also featured Big Show and Big Cass on live pay-per-view broadcasts with Enzo in a shark cage, the first ever women's Money in the Bank, which was won by a dude. WWE wasn't even using pyro because of budget cuts, but out of the 3 years featured in this video, this is probably the most tame and safe one. Let's move over to 2018 and get back to Shinsuke Nakamura. So, okay, he couldn't beat Jinder for the WWE title, so WWE kept going with him and had him win the Royal Rumble and challenge AJ Styles for the WWE Championship at WrestleMania. This rivalry, instead of personal animosity, jealousy, or friendly fire, became Shinsuke Nakamura just becoming a nut hunter, so much so that every time these two had a match, it ended like this. They never had the classic that was expected of them, and this rivalry is just remembered as the one that got away. WWE hyped up this match so much, but it just didn't end up delivering. They hyped this up so much, saying that their rivalry happened in Japan, how this match happened in Japan, and just because it was going to happen in the WWE, it was going to be crazy. Ends up, none of them were really crazy. Let's now talk about your tribal chief and mine, Roman Reigns. This man was getting some of the most hostile reactions ever during this time period. WWE fans wanted to see him as a bad guy, but WWE went against those wishes. I also gotta say that you can dislike the guy, but they gave Roman some really bad promo material too. Always presented as the guy, but he never really felt like the guy. Well, in this year we got Roman Reigns versus Brock Lesnar parts 2, then 3, then 4, and by the time we got to 4, the crowd was just so over this thing that WWE was trying to do of having Roman face adversity, and they just wanted him to take the win and this saga to be over with. First off, these two main evented WrestleMania 34, and in the build, Brock Lesnar was barely showing up to WWE programming. He held this championship for 504 days, and Raw was left without a world champion for a majority of those 504 days. But what made things even worse was they went full finisher spam at WrestleMania with Brock going over, and the crowd in New Orleans was just dead, tired, and not having it. Roman eventually got his moment at SummerSlam, but before that was probably one of the biggest low points in 2018, and that was Backlash. A few weeks ago, I made a video about the quality of WWE pay-per-views and how they've improved from the fan reception to the match cards and the crowds. And this year, WWE pay-per-views didn't feel like something you should give money to either watch in your house or go out and see live. In the main event of the show was the two Samoan Joes, and the crowd could have literally been anywhere else. These two went for 18 minutes and the crowd didn't even want to see 10. Fans were leaving, they were chanting for CM Punk, Rusev Day, which was fumbled. This show is one of the worst WWE shows out there. It also featured the nutshot finish. I forgot to mention what made the nutshot finish much worse was Nakamura and Styles was a no DQ match, but it ended in a no contest after both guys kicked each other in the nuts. I'm not making this stuff up. At Extreme Rules, we got Dolph Ziggler and Seth Rollins for the Intercontinental Championship, and one of the bright spots of this era was Monday Night Rollins. That man tried his absolute best to make that show worth watching. These two wrestled for the Intercontinental Championship, and the fans hijacked their Iron Man match with the fans counting down the end of each minute Royal Rumble style. So WWE eventually removed the timer from the screen, which was even worse. The crowd started counting at random intervals. Cursed times, and cursed is probably the best way to describe the Universal Championship. In these 3 years, it was at its absolute worst. Roman Reigns unfortunately got leukemia and had to relinquish his title just for Brock Lesnar to end up winning it back, and this happened at Crown Jewel. Here we are, the Crown Jewel disaster of 2018. For those unfamiliar, in 2018, WWE struck a 10-year partnership with the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia to have 2 shows a year, which would pay them about $50 million for each event, which in turn had a negative backlash from fans and wrestlers. The first of these shows being the Greatest Royal Rumble. In these shows, WWE would often parade out stars of years gone by, and that was what was supposedly demanded from them. Big names like Triple H, John Cena, and The Undertaker, and we'd get random thrown together builds. At the Greatest Royal Rumble, the rumor was that Yokozuna was requested to appear, but apparently they didn't know that Yokozuna is no longer with us, so the WWE instead brought in a fake Yokozuna. This event had matches like John Cena versus Triple H, The Undertaker versus Rusev in a casket match for some reason, Brock Lesnar and Roman Reigns, of course. But the second time they went here, this was an unmitigated disaster. At this event was the first ever WWE World Cup, a single elimination tournament to determine the best wrestler in the world. The winner would get this ugly looking trophy. First off, John Cena decided to boycott the show. There was supposed to be Miz and Dolph Ziggler in the finals. Okay, this is a match that's delivered before. Miz was instead subbed out for Shane McMahon, the SmackDown commissioner, and he ended up winning this thing. So there it is. Shane McMahon was the best wrestler in the WWE, and since it's a World Cup, apparently the world. The whole arc of Shane started so innocently and eventually divulged into pure madness that I'll get to in the following year. But before we round things off, there's 2 more happenings that I gotta get into. So you're watching a channel called Superkick Studios. A man that used the Superkick as his finish was one of the all-time greats, Shawn Michaels. He had his retirement in 2010 against The Undertaker, and what was so special about him was he actually stayed retired, and in my opinion he retired in the perfect way and with the perfect story. So much talk about him getting back in the ring and wrestling Daniel Bryan or AJ Styles, but nothing was able to get him out of retirement, or so we thought. He came back for one more match, one last hurrah, and that ended up being one of the biggest disasters in the company's history. He was going to team up with his buddy Triple H and take on Kane and The Undertaker in a tag team match. It wasn't 1998, it was 2018. The average age in this match was 51 years old, and this thing was a mess. This went nearly 30 minutes, a lot of filler. Things did not look clean, just really clunky and a huge mess. A huge dark spot on all these guys' career. The highlight was literally Kane's mask coming off. Wrestling Bios did a great breakdown of what made this match so bad, and I'll link that down below. But man, this was ouch. Really ouch. This whole timeline is just so convoluted because to cap off the year, we got Dean Ambrose turning on Seth Rollins the same night where Roman vacated his title due to leukemia. The two won the tag team titles, and then Ambrose did the dirty deed. So he turned heel, and then he started wearing this Bane mask to the ring, and his main purpose was to get vaccinated from catching what the wrestling fans had. He said that everybody smelt really bad. Thankfully, he didn't go through with what WWE wanted him to do, and that was say something nasty about Roman's cancer on screen. I went back and I watched some episodes of Raw from this time. 3 hours without a world champion, without a hot story, without anything of real substance happening is rough. One of the worst segments was Bobby Lashley and his 3 sisters. I love me some Bobby Lashley, but how they rebuilt him is really a testament to the WWE. So Renee Young sat down with Lashley and he talked about each of his sisters, each of them with a weird and strange story attached to them. Kathy was attached to a broom, Jessica was attached to a towel, and Francis had a helmet. And it was your typical brothers and sisters telling a story of days gone by sort of deal. The sit down though was just weird. Lashley delivered it really oddly, but the next segment was even stranger. So Sami Zayn decided to seize the opportunity to poke fun at Lashley and his sisters, bringing out 3 dudes dressed up as his supposed sisters. And each of them gave a reason for why they were carrying these objects, and it was because Bobby was a bully. The towel was for Jessica's apparent tears because Bobby was apparently just an awful brother. Just another crickets segment that you guys can go watch for yourself. Let me know what you guys thought of it if you haven't seen it before. Not to mention we had Bayley and Sasha Banks who were almost in a rivalry and then they got sent to therapy for some reason. Baron Corbin was the constable of Monday Night Raw and then eventually became the acting GM of Raw, and this man for the next 2 years was just shoehorned into the most random factions. The exposure level for him was cranked up right to 100. Raw in 2018 was indescribably and objectively bad. It was the most random, thrown together stuff, and they really lacked what they have today. Premier acts and stories. The ratings were also at an all-time low. The fan base was just so tired of everything that was going on. So much so that the McMahons came out to give a speech on how things would change, that they would take control again and give the fans what they wanted. Well, let's see if they listened in 2019. The year started off with Dean Ambrose leaving the WWE, and following WrestleMania 35, things were odd. Let's pick things up at WrestleMania 35 though. On the road to WrestleMania 35, we had something that the fans absolutely hated with a burning passion, and that was how they fumbled the build to Becky versus Ronda. This was supposed to be a one-on-one match, but Charlotte got added into this, and they also took the title off Asuka so they could make it a winner-take-all match. What didn't help was the ending to the match. The show also had Baron Corbin retiring Kurt Angle, and I thought it was actually a good show with great moments. Only thing is it was really long. Coming out of it, we had Kofi as WWE Champion, Rollins as Universal Champion, and Raw finally had a full-time World Champion. Give me a second, I'll get to Seth Rollins in a bit. We also had the wildcard rule, something which was very loose in its definition. Basically, it meant that the brand split was non-existent and stars could go to either brand whenever. We also had ourselves another disastrous Saudi match, this time with The Undertaker and Goldberg, which main evented Super Showdown. A nearly 10-minute match with sloppy exchanges between the two. Goldberg nearly broke Taker's neck with a botched jackhammer. Undertaker's face tells you everything you need to know, with even the finish looking comical. I'm not trying to hate on this stuff, I'm just telling you guys what happened. Let's move forward. At the same time, Seth Rollins was the Universal Champion, and this man had so much hype coming out of Mania, and then he ran into Baron Corbin. The WWE seriously did not have any strong opponents for him to continue his reign with. This year was also kind of special for me. I went to my first SummerSlam this year, but I also attended my first pay-per-view ever, and you guys will never guess what it was. I drove down 4 hours to see WWE Stomping Grounds. Today, the WWE is doing well for ticket sales. They're running all these huge arenas, different locations with insane crowds. But here in Tacoma, half the arena was tarped off because no one, aside from me and 7,000 other people, actually wanted to go. It's a stark contrast in the quality of the product. Nonetheless, the main event of the show was Seth Rollins versus Baron Corbin for the Universal Championship, with a promised special guest referee that ended up being Lacey Evans. I'm still permanently scarred from this show. Samoa Joe was out here wrestling for the US title when he could have just been wrestling Rollins. We were getting pay-per-view main events that were this, but okay, I'll come back to Rollins eventually because there's still one more thing left. His wife was probably the hottest act though. They made these two team up and he called himself the man's man. Arguably the number 2 act in the company was someone else. And ladies and gentlemen, let me introduce you to the best in the world, Shane McMahon. This man, after winning the 2018 WWE World Cup, descended into absolute madness. He had a rivalry with The Miz, turned on The Miz, and then had Drew McIntyre and Baron Corbin as his goons. He was entering every arena, making Greg Hamilton nearly pass out red while announcing him as the best in the world. So much of WWE programming was just built around Shane McMahon and his stories. What were his stories, you may ask? Well, just casually gonna beat up the company's top star, beefing Roman Reigns for no real reason. At one point, he brutalized Roman's cousin Lance. Why? Because he's the best in the world. Recognize. 2019 was the Shane McMahon show, but the craziest bit of all of this is the rumor that WWE almost put the WWE Championship on Shane McMahon. WWE played up to the fact that there were people that the fans wanted to see in bigger positions, but they just weren't given that opportunity. Kevin Owens even cut that promo that you'll see every now and then on Twitter about how nobody wanted to see that. The McMahons are pretty crazy, and at the top of it all is Vince McMahon, who had some brilliant ideas this year. Let's run through them. First of all was the wildcard rule, but how about another genius idea? Who needs to see wrestling between commercials? For the live audience that paid, they don't need to see it. That'll be boring. Instead, let's make sure that every match ends in a DQ right before the commercial break so we can restart every match as a 2 out of 3 falls match. Next, let's turn Raw's third hour into Raw After Dark and just hope people will think it's edgier cause we dim the lights. Genius. The 24/7 title on Raw, I'm not gonna lie to you guys, shout out to R-Truth and Drake Maverick, because the stuff they did was actually not that bad, personally speaking. It was supposed to be cheesy, it was supposed to be random, and in my opinion, that's what made it work. The story where Drake couldn't consummate his marriage was well done. I can see how people would dislike this. It lives rent-free in my head. 2019 also has another story that lives rent-free in my head, a story that always bugs me because of what ended up happening, and that I'm gonna name is Who Tried to Kill Roman. It was the mystery of the summer. Who keeps trying to end the big dog? He was having scaffolding dropped on him, his SUV got T-boned, so who was it? Murphy? Samoa Joe? Nicholas? No, it was Eric Rowan. But first, they brought in a decoy Eric Rowan. Why did he do this? Because he wanted to break free from Daniel Bryan and he wasn't a quote-unquote puppet. So Roman's out here teaming up with Daniel Bryan, and again it comes back to what I said earlier, the top guy, but he never really felt like the top guy. To cap off this year, he found himself wrestling, you guessed it, Baron Corbin. Corbin's whole thing was, oh, Roman calls himself the big dog, maybe he's an actual dog. So what does he do? He hires someone to dress up in a dog costume, imitate Roman, remix theme and all. Not to be forgotten is the attempt to feed Roman Reigns actual dog food. The basis behind this storyline was Corbin thought the big dog was an actual dog. This was another odd year for the WWE with more lows than highs, but we have one final scenario to get to. The Hell in a Cell disaster. Long story short, Bray Wyatt rebuilt himself up as the Fiend, this mystical, supernatural character with a split personality. On one side, a Mr. Rogers-like TV show host, and on the other side, the Fiend, someone who was out to right past wrongs. Well, they fast-tracked him into the main event scene against Seth Rollins, WWE's #1 babyface, who had just been booked against Baron Corbin for 2 months, and they found themselves in a situation where neither of the two could lose. Not to mention that Seth, who in the build-up to WrestleMania 35 was just a complete badass, was cowering in fear to the Fiend, and he had lost a lot of that coolness that he had earlier. So we get to Hell in a Cell, and again, I already made a video on this, so I'll go Cliff Notes version. We have this red lighting that surrounds the ring so the fans can barely see, and I don't think they like the booking of this match either. Wyatt attempts to use a mallet to get Rollins, the ref does nothing, but when Rollins uses essentially a smaller mallet, the ref calls off the match and it ends in a no contest. And right then and there, the mystique of the Fiend was fumbled. They had a stretcher come out and attempt to take him away. Fans were pissed, like outraged at what they had just seen from the WWE. The same structure in which the legendary Mick Foley nearly killed himself multiple times ended like this. Fans were chanting for refunds, they were chanting bullshit, they were chanting for AEW, not to mention that coming into this show there were barely any matches announced for the actual program. So many other weird things happening this year. Brock running out and winning the Money in the Bank out of nowhere. Lashley constantly pointing his ass into the camera. Sammy would come out cutting these 13-minute promos on how much the fans sucked in his eyes. The Lashley and Lana segments. You guys remember the Mike Kanellis storyline where Maria was pregnant and said that she'd rather have Becky impregnate her because she was more of a man than Mike? Yeah, it happened. Psst, you're forgetting something. I'm forgetting something? Yeah, Kofi. Don't forget about Kofi. Kofi? After one of the best feel-good moments in WWE history, Kofi lost his championship to Brock Lesnar in 8 seconds, and he never got a rematch. Why does Brock always... Never mind. And with that, WWE's decade came to an end. After this, of course, we did have weird, we did have strange, we did have downright ugly, but lately things have been different. Are weekly shows the greatest they've ever been? Are they must-watch TV? Not really. Do they have more consistency? Is the quality stronger? Yes. So just enjoy the times we're in. The WWE lately has been strong and it's just been solid. As for these 3 years, it was nonsense. It was comedy, it was random, it was odd. It really tested you as a fan of the WWE. It was sports entertainment at its absolute weirdest and at times lowest. Now we got Cody Rhodes, we got Roman Reigns as the Machiavellian villain. There's different acts and stories to focus on, so let's just enjoy the times we're in. And when you think that WWE is garbage, never forget these times. And that, my friends, was WWE's disastrous end to the decade. We're out of the pits. Let's never ever go back. See you guys.